We are today with Farid Zakaria. Thanks very much for being with us, Farid. Hello.
Pleasure to be with you.
Farid Zakaria is a famous American journalist and political commentator specialized in international affairs. He is the host of CNN's Farid Zakaria GPS. He is also a contributor to Time Magazine, The Washington Post, and other publications. Farid, we'll talk with you about the state of America post-election. The USA are still a very divided country. What does the fact that Donald Trump does not concede and that he's still supported by millions of American people tell us about the state of American democracy right now?
Well, as you say, it tells us how deeply divided it is, and it tells us that the nature of this division is now quite different than it has been before. It used to be that the division was basically over issues, political issues, economic issues. Now it is a much deeper divide. It is a kind of cultural divide between two groups of people who really see themselves almost as not political opponents, but as enemies. And so you have the people who voted for Joe Biden, generally speaking, tend to live in urban areas. They tend to have some kind of diploma or degree. They tend to have some experience of a multicultural life, maybe friends, relatives. And the people who vote for Donald Trump tend to live in rural areas. They tend to be more white. They tend to be less educated. And this cultural division has become much deeper than merely a political one. And the reason I bring this up is it's almost like you are supporting a sports team. Your team can never make a mistake. Your team is always right. Your team can do bad things, which you will excuse because they are part of your team. So that mentality, which has been transferred really from all the realm of sports and tribal warfare, has now entered the American political scene.
Is American democracy broken now? Are the damages done those last 4 years fixable, repairable?
Oh, of course it's fixable and repairable. Look, every democracy goes through enormous challenges. The American democracy has been through the Civil War. It has been through the internment of Japanese Americans during World War II. It has been through the period of McCarthyism, and of course went through Richard Nixon and Watergate. But there is within it a kind of sustainability, and endurance. I think that one of the important things for people to understand is Donald Trump may not concede ever. It doesn't matter. He has no role in the choice of his successor. He will have to leave office. Joe Biden will have to become the president. It is bad manners. It is bad for democratic norms. It is bad for the political culture of the country. But ultimately, the Constitution and the rule of law will prevail, and Trump will leave. What he is doing is setting himself up to continue to hold great political influence with his followers by creating this conspiracy theory that he actually won. It's a very dangerous kind of theory. I believe it should remind us all of the German stab in the back theory that took place after World War I, when ultra right-wing forces in Germany said, the Germans never lost the war. It was the Jews and the communists who forced it to surrender. That is the kind of conspiracy that Trump is setting up. He will have to leave office. The problem is the damage he will do will last many, many years longer.
And are you worried about the transition period? Do you think that the Trump administration could take very radical decisions between now and the 20th of January?
I'm worried. I think so far he is so busy concocting this conspiracy theory and trying to rally his supporters, he seems to have lost interest in actually being the president. He doesn't seem to be doing much. There are few reports that he was looking into attacking Iran, but in general, his focus and energy seems to be devoted mainly to his political survival. What I worry more about is American government is complicated enough as it is, because unlike in France, we do not have a strong central government. You have to constantly coordinate, say, on the issue of the COVID-19 response with dozens and dozens of state governments, local governments. And in this period of transition, you want there to be a smooth handoff from one administration to the other. That is unlikely to happen. So the Biden administration will come in a little bit behind. But, it's not the end of the world. It's manageable. It's just one more indication that for Donald Trump, everything is about himself. It is about his ego, his egotistical needs. It's never about the country.
Since his election, President-elect Joe Biden has talked a lot about how it is important to unify the country, to put American people together. How could he achieve this? How could he do this? What kind of decisions does he have to take?
It's a very good question. I think some of it is just the power of rhetoric and the power of words. These do matter. For him to say that he wants to be the president of all Americans, he wants to reach out. Some of it will be to show that he has a kind of respect for where people are coming from, that he's trying to find a program that works for everybody. I think my own advice to him would be to approach it from this view with the COVID-19. Make sure that you are trying to help all Americans in all the states. Try to do something like an infrastructure plan that would be spending money for infrastructure in all the states. Try to find things that can kind of bring us together rather than those issues on which Americans are deeply divided. For example, immigration today, just for whatever reason, America has become very divided. Roughly half, actually more than half, support immigration, but then there is a very loud, angry minority that wants less immigration. So maybe hold off on that for now. Build some trust, build some political capital. I think it's possible. And by the way, this is a challenge not just for President Biden. In all Western societies, you see these divisions. After all, the Gilets jaunes in France follow a very similar pattern from what I was describing in terms of Trump supporters. They live in rural areas. They tend to be less educated. They tend to be more white. And that distrust, that deep cultural divide, is harder to bridge than a normal political divide.
This said, the challenges are immense for Joe Biden. There's the recession, the COVID crisis, this America so divided right now. It's a tremendous task that he's facing now.
Yes, in some ways, it looked like when Barack Obama and Biden came in 2008, that was a difficult period with the great financial crisis and the recession. But I think this is even deeper because of two things. One, in some ways, the breadth and the magnitude of the crisis is even greater. In the 08-09, you knew what to do. It was a classic financial crisis. There was a solution. In this case, it's more complicated. This is really a once-in-a-century event. But the second part is Donald Trump is going nowhere. Even if Donald Trump leaves the White House, which he will, he is going to be the most powerful Republican in the country. He is going to be out there screaming and tweeting about everything that Joe Biden does. That places a constraint, a limitation, a barrier to what Trump can do. Because anytime any Republican tries to cooperate with Joe Biden, there is going to be Donald Trump out there screaming and tweeting and seeking vengeance for what he will describe as the fraudulent election that he won. So that those two factors of a global pandemic of a once in a century kind and a global demagogue of a once in a century kind have come together, and poor Joe Biden has to manage both at the same time.
So you think, don't you, that Donald Trump will be there again in 2024?
Look, we can only make predictions, but the man is a total egotist. He is a narcissist. He likes nothing more than publicity. He is the most powerful Republican in the party. The base of the Republican Party loves him. Why would he not do it? What else would he do with his life? And just remember, he will be in 2024 as old as Joe Biden is today. So anyone who tells him he's too old he will say, Biden won at that age. Why should I not run? So I suspect that he will certainly try his best to do it. It's possible that I'm wrong and that he will fade in political significance and there will not be an audience for his crackpot views and conspiracy theories. But I see no sign of that. The Republican Party has essentially become a personality cult centered around Donald Trump.
We mentioned COVID, and your book, 10 Lessons for a Post-Pandemic World, is about COVID and how this crisis has changed the world we live in. Do you think that the way the pandemic has been handled by the Trump administration has played an important part in the defeat of Donald Trump?
I think so. I think it played the decisive part, but what I mean by that is this. Trump was always unpopular. I think one thing people outside America don't appreciate is that ever since he ran in 2015, Donald Trump has been disliked by a majority of Americans. His disapproval rating has always been higher than 50%. He has the lowest approval ratings of any president in American history since we've been collecting this data, which is since the 1940s. So, he got elected, as you well know, even though he lost the popular vote by 3 million votes because of a few states in the Midwest, 70,000 votes in 3 states, which is a legitimate win given the Electoral College. But throughout his presidency, he has been unpopular and disliked by a majority of the Americans. This time around, he not only lost the Electoral College, he lost the popular vote by close to 6 million. This is one of the largest losses, even in percentage terms, in American history. So he was always unpopular. He managed, because of the Republican advantage with the Electoral College, to win. But this time around, that didn't work out. So COVID, I think, was the decisive factor. But it's not, I think it's important for people to understand that Trump was always somebody who appealed to a minority of Americans, but they were passionate and intense in their preference for him. That's what got him across. It's the intensity of support, not the majority.
The most recent news about COVID, Farid Zakaria, are the announcements of a possible vaccine from Pfizer or Moderna. Are you optimistic about how those vaccines would be distributed worldwide? To put it another way, we might say that there's a choice to be made in America between vaccine nationalism and vaccine diplomacy, how to distribute the vaccine?
I am optimistic. The Moderna and the Pfizer vaccines are slightly more difficult to distribute than the next phase that will come online, which are single-dose vaccines that do not have to be kept at very cool temperatures. Both Pfizer and Moderna have this problem. They are double-dose vaccines, and they have to be kept very cold to be transported. But remember, there are going to be 6, 7, 8, 9 vaccines that will come out, and there are also going to be treatments that come out. So I think we will be able to look forward to some even more good news. I think the reality of distribution is this. We have the infrastructure to distribute vaccines in the Western world, at least. We have done it with the flu vaccine every year. We will have to do it in other countries, but there we have been distributing vaccines through, groups like the WHO and the Gates Foundation and places like that. So there is some capacity and know-how. I think we could be, I'm optimistic that in 2021 we will enter into the second phase of this crisis. The first phase of this crisis has been a public health response that has been required from the public sector, from government. And in most of the West, the government has failed. Unfortunately, I think it's true for both the United States, but also France, United Kingdom, Italy, Spain. Governmental institutions have not handled this as well as they could. But the second phase of the crisis is going to be one largely dominated by the private sector, as pharmaceutical companies will come up with vaccines and with drugs, and then we have to find ways to distribute them. I am more optimistic on this second phase, and I think that there may be fewer problems and more good news that comes out of it than the first phase.
One of the big unknowns of this post-pandemic world is the nature of the confrontation between the United States and China. How has COVID changed the ratio of power between those two countries?
Well, I say in my book that the main effect of COVID-19 and this pandemic has been to accelerate history rather than to change it. So these forces were already in play, the brewing tensions between the United States and China. What COVID-19 has done is it has accelerated them. I suspect that many of these problems would have become large anyway. I think that what the pandemic has done in terms of the balance of power, it has further shifted that power in a way that makes us realize what is now a reality, which is that we live in a bipolar world. There are two countries, the United States and China, that tower over the rest. So China is now the second largest economy in the world, but it is larger than the next four economies after it put together. In other words, you take Japan, Germany, Britain, and France and put them all together, and that is the size of the Chinese economy. China has the second largest military budget in the world after the US, but again, it is larger than the next four military budgets put together. This means that China and the US now are the two defining great powers, superpowers of the age, and the relationship between them is going to be the central dynamic of geopolitics and geoeconomics. The big difference is this. During the Cold War, we did not have an interconnected global economy. At the height of the Cold War, the United States and the Soviet Union did $2 billion of trade every year. The United States and China do $2 billion of trade every day. So it is a very different world. We are going to have to find ways to allow for competition, but also cooperation. That makes it more complicated than even the Cold War was.
It might be a bit early to say, but how would you define the diplomacy of Joe Biden? How would you imagine it?
I think that the easy part to imagine is his attitude toward America's traditional allies, like France. I think he will try to reach out, he will try to restore those alliances, and he will try to return America to the position it has been in for 75 years, which is engaged with the world, open to alliances, open to multilateralism. That part, I think, is the easy part. The problem is the world has changed. You can't simply return back to normal. You can't put Humpty Dumpty together again. As I say, we are in a new age, bipolar. China is much more powerful than it was even 10 years ago when Joe Biden came into office as a vice president, 12 years ago, sorry. You also have the reality of countries like India and Brazil and Indonesia and Turkey becoming much more powerful. And you have the reality of a new European Union, which is looking for its own independent voice. So you can't go back to some, nostalgic past. What we have to try to find, and this is going to be Biden's challenge, is how do you navigate this new world with an engaged America, with an America that believes in its historical role at the center of international relations. I think it's doable, and I think the Biden team is very, very seasoned and bright and dedicated, and so I think it will be possible. But it's a new world out there.
I have one last question for you, Fareed Zakaria, as a journalist, as an American journalist. We in France are sometimes surprised by the activism of big media corporations like the likes of CNN, the New York Times, the Washington Post, almost campaigning for Joe Biden. Is it justified? How do you explain this?
I think the way I would put it is this. I think it would be fair to say that what you are describing was not true before Trump. And I'm not sure it will be true after Trump. Because of this, Trump was a unique phenomenon in American politics. He began his political career with an outright lie. You know, the claim that Barack Obama was not born in America, was a Kenyan citizen, etc. He is ending his political career, at least for now, with another lie, that the elections were rigged and there was fraud. What does the media do in a situation like that? In other words, to point out constantly, continuously, daily, that Donald Trump is telling lies, is infecting the political landscape and discourse with falsehood, with untruths, with crazy ideas. That seems to me to be a duty of the media. The media has to cannot be neutral on the issue of truth versus lies. It cannot be neutral. If some candidate was to get up and say the earth is flat, we are not going to report this as a matter of fact or some kind of balance. We are going to say the candidate says this and it is false. It is a lie. Because we have had to do this, and because Trump lies 5 times a day before he has breakfast, it seems like there is a kind of political bias. I at least don't approach it that way. I try to approach it analytically. But you have a unique phenomenon. We have never had anything like this before. And so, yes, it looks like the press has become very adversarial. But I would like to think that a lot of the press is being adversarial on behalf of truth and facts and against lies and dishonesty and deceit and conspiracy theories. Not because it has taken a partisan view on one political party or the other.
Many thanks, Fareed Zakaria, for being with us today. Thank you very much for your time. So your book, 10 Lessons for a Post-Pandemic World, will be out in France, translated in French next January. Thanks again for your time.
Voilà, vous venez de
My
suivre.
pleasure. It was a real pleasure.